The sun's magnetic field is collapsing, and the plasma loss is shocking experts, because what is happening to our star right now could plunge Earth into a catastrophe that makes ice ages look like minor weather changes. Picture the massive invisible shield that protects our entire solar system suddenly developing giant holes, allowing the sun's life-giving plasma to hemorrhage into space at rates that have never been recorded in human history. We are not talking about normal solar activity. We are talking about our star literally bleeding its energy into the void while scientists scramble to understand why. But here is what has space experts in complete panic. The magnetic field collapse is not random. Satellite data shows the breakdown is following a pattern that suggests something is fundamentally changing inside the sun's core. The plasma loss is accelerating, and the magnetic holes are growing larger every day, creating weak spots that could affect everything from our power grids to our planet's climate. The most terrifying discovery came from comparing current solar data with historical records. The last time the sun showed similar magnetic instability, Earth experienced the Little Ice Age, which killed millions and reshaped entire civilizations. But this collapse is happening faster and more dramatically than anything in recorded history. Is the sun entering a new phase that could freeze our planet? Or are we witnessing the beginning of solar changes that could make Earth uninhabitable for human life? The sun is hemorrhaging plasma at a rate that has scientists scrambling to explain what they are witnessing. December 21st, 2025, solar observers detected something that should not exist during this phase of the solar cycle: a gargantuan coronal hole stretching across the sun's surface, one of the largest documented in the 21st century. This is not just rare atmospheric behavior. This is the sun's magnetic field splitting open and bleeding billions of tons of superheated plasma directly into space, creating what researchers are calling an unprecedented anomaly that defies current solar models. The timing makes this discovery even more alarming. We are at solar maximum, the peak of the sun's 11-year activity cycle, when the magnetic field should be tightly wound and intensely active. Instead, massive sections of the corona are simply missing, replaced by dark voids that reveal deeper layers of our star. These coronal holes typically appear during solar minimum, the quiet phase when the sun's magnetic field reorganizes itself. Finding one this size, positioned to directly impact Earth, during solar maximum represents something climate scientists and space weather experts have never adequately explained. Are we watching normal solar behavior that happens to be extremely rare? Or has the sun entered a completely new phase of magnetic instability that could trigger cascading geological and atmospheric disasters across Earth? The high-speed plasma stream is already approaching our planet, and the answers scientists desperately need remain frustratingly out of reach. December 21st, 2025, the winter solstice, and solar physicists monitoring the sun through NASA's Solar Dynamics Observatory identify something that should not be there. Shocking. The 193 angstrom filter, specifically calibrated to observe the sun's corona at extreme ultraviolet wavelengths, reveals a massive dark region stretching across the solar surface. This is a coronal hole, an area where the sun's outermost atmosphere appears to have vanished, leaving a void of super low density, extremely low temperature plasma. Coronal hole. The visual is stark and unmistakable. Where the corona normally glows brilliantly in the filtered imagery, this section appears almost black, a gigantic wound in the sun's magnetic structure. The darkness does not indicate absence of the sun itself, but rather the absence of the high-temperature plasma that typically fills the corona. Scientists are actually seeing deeper into the sun than normal, looking through layers that are usually obscured by dense coronal material. Stark. The scale of this coronal hole puts it among the largest ever documented in the 21st century, possibly ranking in the top 5 or top 20, depending on measurement criteria. But size alone does not capture the full danger. This coronal hole occupies a trans-equatorial position, slicing directly through the sun's ecliptic plane. That geometric detail carries enormous implications for Earth. When coronal holes form in polar regions, their plasma streams miss Earth entirely. This one sits in perfect alignment to blast our planet head-on. Earth. The southern extension stretches even further beyond typical positioning, creating an asymmetric structure that increases both the duration and the intensity of Earth's exposure to the high-speed stream. Space weather stations have classified this as a positive polarity coronal hole, tracked across multiple solar rotations. The real-time data reveals something troubling. This is not transient. Researchers suspect this may be the same coronal hole observed in March 2025, meaning it has persisted through approximately 18 complete solar rotations, defying standard models of coronal hole behavior. Persisted. And Earth sits directly in its path. Understanding what is happening requires understanding the sun's normal behavior, and right now, nothing about this situation qualifies as normal. The sun operates on a magnetic cycle spanning 8 to 13 years, averaging around 12 years per complete cycle. During this period, the sun's magnetic field undergoes a complete polarity flip. North becomes south, south becomes north, a cosmic reorganization driving virtually all solar activity. We are currently at the very end of solar maximum, entering the descending phase. Solar maximum represents the most chaotic period, when the magnetic field reaches peak disorder. There is no clear polarity because the sun sits in the middle of flipping, creating conditions for intense solar flares, coronal mass ejections, and general magnetic turbulence. Coronal holes follow predictable patterns tied to the solar cycle. They become more frequent and grow larger during the descending phase and solar minimum, when the sun's magnetic field establishes a clear new polarity. During solar minimum, coronal holes typically appear in polar regions, oriented perpendicular to Earth's orbital plane, meaning their streams do not impact our planet. What we are witnessing in 2025 defies this pattern completely. We are seeing massive coronal holes during solar maximum, the phase when they should be smallest and rarest. Multiple gigantic coronal holes have appeared this year, and the current formation is the latest in this unprecedented lineage. The positioning makes the anomaly worse. These are not appearing in polar regions. They are cutting through trans-equatorial zones, positioned to directly blast Earth. Wrong timing, wrong size, wrong location. Solar physicists confront an uncomfortable question. If we are already seeing this magnitude during solar maximum, what happens during the descending phase and solar minimum, when coronal holes are supposed to get bigger? The sun could be shedding even more plasma during periods when Earth should experience relative calm. Something fundamental about this solar cycle is operating outside expected parameters, and scientists lack answers to explain why. This behavior breaks the rulebook for what we expect from the sun, and it raises urgent, unanswered questions about near-term risks to Earth. Solar physicists confront an uncomfortable question. If we are already seeing this magnitude during solar maximum, what happens during the descending phase and solar minimum, when they are supposed to get bigger? The sun could be shedding even more plasma during periods when Earth should experience relative calm. Something fundamental about this solar cycle is operating outside expected parameters, and scientists lack answers to explain why. To understand the danger, you need to understand the mechanism. A coronal hole forms when the sun's magnetic field splits open in a way that fundamentally changes how plasma behaves. Normally, magnetic field lines on the sun loop back into the solar surface, containing the superheated plasma within the corona. In a coronal hole, those magnetic field lines do not loop back. They break open and extend straight out into interplanetary space, creating what scientists call an open magnetic field structure. This open configuration changes everything. Instead of containing plasma, the magnetic field actively shuttles that plasma away from the sun, accelerating it into high-speed streams that blast outward through the solar system. The bigger the coronal hole, the more plasma is accelerated, and the more strongly Earth becomes embedded in that unique magnetic field structure emanating from our star. The sun dominates our solar system in ways most people fundamentally underestimate. It contains 99.86% of all the mass in the entire solar system. Everything else, the planets, moons, asteroids, comets, and dust, comprises less than 1/7 of 1%. That gravitational and magnetic dominance means the sun's influence over Earth is overwhelming and inescapable. Solar wind flows constantly from the sun in all directions, creating what is called the heliosphere, a bubble of solar influence extending far beyond Pluto. All planets sit enmeshed within the interplanetary magnetic field that this solar wind creates. During a coronal hole high-speed stream impact, Earth does not just experience ambient solar wind. Earth connects directly to the open magnetic field structure of the coronal hole itself. At one astronomical unit, roughly 93 million miles from the sun, Earth orbits close enough that these direct connections happen rapidly and intensely. The magnetic field lines extending from the coronal hole curve outward as the sun rotates, eventually intersecting Earth's orbit and our magnetosphere. When that connection occurs, our planet becomes embedded in a focused stream of accelerated plasma, traveling at velocities that dwarf normal solar wind speeds. The acceleration mechanism works like this. The open magnetic field acts like a funnel and accelerator combined. Plasma that would normally be contained in the corona gets channeled along these open field lines, picking up speed as it travels away from the sun. Because the plasma accelerates to such high velocities, its density drops dramatically. Less plasma occupies any given volume of space, but that plasma is moving incredibly fast, carrying enormous kinetic energy. Current measurements reveal the scale of what is already happening. Solar wind velocity has elevated to 682 kilometers per second, significantly above normal background levels. For context, normal solar wind typically flows at 300 to 500 kilometers per second. We are seeing velocities nearly double the baseline, and this is before the main high-speed stream from the massive coronal hole even arrives. The pattern over recent weeks shows sustained abnormality. Instead of the typical cycle of elevated solar wind followed by quiet periods, where velocities drop back to normal, measurements show we have been consistently tapping 600 to 700 kilometers per second for an extended time frame. There has been no significant cool-off period, no return to baseline conditions that would allow Earth's magnetosphere to recover from the constant bombardment. Interplanetary magnetic field strength tells the same story. Normal field strength at Earth's orbit measures around 5 nanotesla. Recent measurements spiked to 14 nanotesla, nearly triple the normal intensity. Even as conditions somewhat settled, the field strength remains at 9 nanotesla, still nearly double normal levels. This is the sun hemorrhaging plasma directly into space. Earth sits downstream from the wound, embedded in the outflow, with no way to avoid what is coming. The connection between coronal holes and earthquakes represents one of the most controversial topics in geophysics, a correlation mainstream science largely refuses to acknowledge despite mounting evidence. The pattern is undeniable. The biggest earthquakes consistently occur after high-speed stream impacts from giant coronal holes. Historical earthquake records reveal something conventional plate tectonics struggles to explain. The largest earthquakes on record occurred when gigantic coronal holes dominated the sun's surface, blasting Earth with sustained plasma streams that correlate with massive seismic energy release. The mechanism remains debated, but the temporal correlation exists regardless of whether models can explain it. The year 2025 provides compelling real-time evidence. This year ranks as one of the strongest for seismic activity ever recorded. A magnitude 8.8 megaquake struck earlier this year, releasing enormous energy. Beyond that, 2025 has produced numerous magnitude 7 earthquakes, creating cumulative seismic energy rivaling the most active years in history. Only 5 years in recorded history have experienced magnitude 9 or larger earthquakes. The year 1906 stands out as particularly catastrophic. Yet when total seismic energy is calculated, 1906 barely exceeds 2025, despite lacking modern monitoring technology. March 2025 provides the clearest example. A coronal hole similar to the current formation rotated into position in late March. On March 29th, days after the high-speed stream arrival, a magnitude 7.7 earthquake struck Myanmar, Burma, Thailand. The entire region experienced violent shaking across multiple countries. Concurrent events make the correlation more intriguing. At the exact time, Venus and Mercury aligned in inferior conjunction, positioning both planets directly between Earth and the Sun. December 2025 shows a remarkably similar configuration. Venus and Mars approach superior conjunction on the Sun's far side, the first time in 6.6 years. This occurs every 2,338 days, creating repeating cycles. Some researchers believe influence solar activity. Beyond the seismic threat lies another danger meteorologists consistently fail to acknowledge: the connection between coronal hole high-speed streams and extreme weather intensification. Research demonstrates clear links between these solar events and violent atmospheric phenomena, particularly tornadoes and cyclones. Yet 99% of weather forecasters remain completely ignorant of space weather's influence on Earth's atmosphere. The mechanism centers on vorticity, the tendency of air to rotate, the primary ingredient for tornado and cyclone formation. Coronal hole high-speed stream impacts increase atmospheric vorticity through processes involving the global electric circuit. During certain times of year, when conditions already favor rotation, this space weather forcing becomes a significant amplification factor. The year 2025 set records for tornado activity across the United States. The correlation with coronal hole activity is impossible to ignore. A massive coronal hole similar to the current formation impacted Earth in late March. Within days, early April brought a catastrophic tornado outbreak that shattered previous records for severity and geographic extent. Water and ice crystals in storm systems carry substantial electromagnetic charge. Thunderstorms can contain 100 million watts of potential electrical energy. Even rainstorms without lightning possess significant electromagnetic components, making them highly responsive to changes in the global electric circuit. Current California weather forecasts predict heavy rain and flood watches for Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday. The coronal hole high-speed stream impact is expected on Monday or Tuesday. The timing creates dangerous convergence, where space weather will likely amplify an already significant weather system. Forecasters consistently underestimate storm intensity because they do not account for space weather effects. The rule is simple: whatever the forecast predicts, expect more. California faces significant rainfall already. The incoming coronal hole impact will make it worse, and mainstream meteorology remains blind to the connection. The most troubling aspect is not what scientists know, it is what they do not know and refuse to admit. NASA's Solar Dynamics Observatory has provided unprecedented views of the sun, but that does not translate to a century of continuous data. We are working with a limited historical baseline, which makes definitive statements about normal versus abnormal nearly impossible. The first quality images of coronal holes came from Skylab in 1973, just over 50 years ago. Before that, scientists had no visual evidence that these structures existed. The observational record is not continuous. Gaps exist where monitoring was offline or limited. Trying to establish typical coronal hole behavior from such a short dataset is like understanding ocean currents from watching waves for an afternoon. This coronal hole is definitely abnormal compared to what is typically observed. Typical monitoring only encompasses a few decades of observations. The persistence represents another anomaly that models struggle to explain. Normal coronal holes close after a few rotations, as the magnetic field reorganizes. Current holes persist for 5, 10, even 15 rotations. That is bizarre by any standard. This entire solar cycle has exhibited weird characteristics that physicists quietly acknowledge in technical papers, while publicly maintaining everything is normal. What happens when coronal holes do not close? What happens when they persist, rotation after rotation, continuously hemorrhaging plasma into space? NASA's institutional overconfidence presents a fundamental problem. The "we know everything" attitude permeates communications, even as data reveals phenomena that models never predicted. How do gigantic coronal holes affect solar dynamics when they persist for months? How does the open magnetic field, constantly emitting into space, affect Earth? These questions lack satisfactory answers. Advanced climate models failed to predict current coronal hole intensity during solar maximum. Simulations suggested these conditions should not occur until 2040. The models were wrong. Observations are happening that theoretical frameworks cannot explain. One of the largest coronal holes of the 21st century is blasting plasma directly at Earth. Geomagnetic storms already impact our planet. Earthquake patterns for 2025 show record-breaking seismic energy. Weather systems intensify beyond forecasts. Planetary alignments echo configurations from earlier major seismic events. Scientists cannot fully explain the persistence, intensity, or timing. If the descending phase and solar minimum make these holes bigger as patterns suggest, what is coming? Are we witnessing rare but normal solar behavior, or has the sun entered a phase that could fundamentally alter Earth's systems? The high-speed stream is approaching. Questions remain unanswered. We enter uncharted territory with a star we thought we understood.